The chairs in the reception hall scraped against the hardwood floor, and I felt every single person in that room turn to look at me. It was the second Saturday of October, the kind of crisp autumn afternoon that southern Ontario does better than anywhere else on Earth. The maples outside the window burning orange and red, the sky so blue it almost hurt. My brother David was getting married at a restored heritage hall in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a place our mother had been planning for 2 years. White tablecloths, tall candles, a string quartet near the entrance playing something I didn't recognize. I stood just inside the doorway, still holding my officer's cap in my left hand. I had driven 4 hours from Ottawa to be here. 4 hours, and a decision I had made somewhere around Kingston, somewhere on that long flat stretch of the 401, where there's nothing to do but think. I was wearing my Canadian Forces Service dress uniform. Dark rifle green, with the gold maple leaf insignia on my collar, the service ribbons above my left breast pocket, 2 gold stars on each shoulder. My boots were polished to a mirror shine that had taken me 40 minutes the night before. 130 guests turned to look at me. I kept walking. Let me tell you how I got here. Not to that doorway to this life. I grew up in Barrie, Ontario, about 90 minutes north of Toronto. My father ran a hardware store on Dunlop Street that his own father had started, and my mother worked part-time at the school board. We were not a wealthy family, but we were a solid one, the kind where every Sunday dinner ended with my father asking what we had accomplished that week. He asked David and my younger sister Claire the same question. It was not a cruel question. It was just his way of measuring the world by visible output, by things you could hold in your hand. I was 18 when I told him I wanted to join the Canadian Armed Forces. He set down his fork. My mother looked at the tablecloth. David, who was 21 and already working at my father's store, said, "Is this a joke?" It was not a joke. I had been thinking about it since I was 15, since a Remembrance Day assembly at our school where a woman in uniform stood at the front of the gymnasium and spoke about her 2 tours in Afghanistan with a quiet steadiness that made something in my chest go completely still. I did not want to be famous. I did not want to be decorated. I wanted to be that still. "You're smart," my father said, which was his way of saying I was too smart for this. "You could go to Western. You could study business. Come work with me, with David." "I don't want to work at the store." I said it gently. I didn't mean it as a wound, but I watched it land like one. My mother said, "Rachel, the military is not a career for a young woman with options." I had heard this sentence, or some version of it, from most of the people I respected. Options. As though choosing service was a failure of imagination. I enlisted anyway. I was commissioned as an officer after completing my degree through the Royal Military College in Kingston, which I paid for myself through the regular officer training plan. My parents came to my graduation ceremony. They sat in the bleachers and clapped when they were supposed to. My mother cried a little, which I think surprised her. My father shook my hand afterward and said, "Well, you did it." That was the most he ever said about it. Over the next 14 years, I was deployed twice, once to Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance, once to Mali with Operation Presence. I served on a joint task force. I spent 18 months on secondment to NATO headquarters in Brussels. I was promoted 4 times. I missed Christmas 4 times, 2 of them without being able to call home because of communication blackouts. Every time I came back, my mother asked how long I was staying, not in a warm way. In a way that suggested my presence was temporary and therefore not worth fully investing in. David married his girlfriend of 6 years, Emily, a dental hygienist from Street Catharines, and I sent a gift from Kabul and a card that took 3 weeks to arrive. Claire got her master's degree, and I called her from a satellite phone outside a base in Bamako to tell her I was proud of her. I made those calls. I was the one who reached across the distance. What I got back was the understanding, slowly built over years, that my family loved me in the abstract, that they were relieved when I came home safe, that they appreciated my service the way people appreciate infrastructure. They were glad it existed. They just didn't want to think about it too much. And then David got engaged again. Emily had left 2 years earlier. I never fully understood why, and David didn't volunteer it. Her name was Sophie. They had met at a winery in Prince Edward County, and they were getting married in October in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and I was invited, and I was expected. My mother called me in September. I was in Ottawa, at NDHQ, working long days on a training evaluation that I couldn't discuss. "It's going to be beautiful," she said. "Sophie's family has wonderful taste. Very elegant. I'm sure it will be." "Rachel, A pause. David asked me to mention something. About the wedding. I waited. He'd prefer that you didn't wear your uniform. You know how it is. Sophie's family as well. They're not really military people. Her father is in finance. It might make people uncomfortable. I sat with that for a moment. My uniform makes people uncomfortable. It's not that. It's just it draws attention. And this is David and Sophie's day. They don't want it to be about anyone else. I thought about the 40-minute drive to the dry cleaner I'd made last week, where I dropped off my service dress for pressing. I thought about the boots. I understand, I said. And I did understand. I just wasn't sure I agreed. I drove to Niagara-on-the-Lake the Friday before the wedding and checked into a bed and breakfast on a quiet street near the old town. It was run by a retired couple, John and Margaret, who had a grown son in the Navy. When I signed the guest book and listed my rank out of habit, John stood up a little straighter and said, "Thank you for your service, Major." I had been promoted since the last time I'd updated my habits. I was a brigadier general now, 1 star. I'd had the rank for 7 months and still sometimes forgot. I sat on the bed that Friday evening and looked at my 2 options hanging on the back of the closet door. On the left, a navy blue wrap dress I had bought in a hurry at the Rideau Center 3 weeks earlier. Conservative, appropriate. The kind of dress that would disappear into a room. On the right, my service dress uniform. Cleaned and pressed, the gold on the collar catching the lamplight. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. About Sophie's father in finance. About David, who had called me intense at our last family dinner and laughed afterward like it was a compliment. I thought about a woman I had served under in Latvia, Brigadier General Anne-Marie Tremblay, who had once told me on a dark January morning when I was questioning whether I had chosen the right path that the uniform was not vanity. "It is a record," she said. "Every ribbon is a thing you survived. Every rank is a thing you earned. Do not apologize for your record." I reached up and took the navy dress off the hanger. Then I stopped. I put it back. I opened the other side of the closet and started to get dressed. I arrived at the hall 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, watching guests in cocktail dresses and suits file through the front entrance. A few of them were older men, Sophie's uncles, maybe, or family friends moving with the careful deliberateness of people who had dressed up and weren't used to it. I checked my collar in the visor mirror, adjusted my cap, took it off because I was going inside. Then I got out of the car and walked to the door. The string quartet was playing something soft when I stepped into the entrance hall. The ceremony space was through a set of open double doors to my left, chairs arranged in neat rows, flowers everywhere, white and cream and pale gold. And that's when the chairs scraped, not all at once. One man stood up first, near the back on the right side, a tall man in his 60s, dark suit, straight spine. Then the man beside him. Then 3 more, in quick succession, across the aisle. Then a woman in her 40s near the middle. Then more, 15, 20, 25 people. A man near the front barrel, chested, silver-haired, the kind of stillness in his face that you only get from having been in command, said it in a voice that carried cleanly across the room. "Officer on deck? Not Marines. Not soldiers. Canadian veterans, most of them. Some in Legion blazers with their medals pinned to the left breast, some in civilian clothes. Former Army, some Navy. At least one I recognized from a photo as a retired RCAF wing commander. They knew what a Canadian Forces service dress uniform looked like. They knew what 1 star on a shoulder meant. They stood because they recognized the record. The room had gone completely, absolutely silent. I stood in the doorway and did the only thing I could do. I nodded a slow, deliberate acknowledgement and said, quietly, "At ease." They sat down. I found a seat near the back. I didn't look for my mother, but I felt her looking at me. The ceremony was beautiful. Sophie was radiant in a simple gown, and David cried when she walked down the aisle, which surprised me, because I had never seen my brother cry. The officiant said things about partnership and patience and choosing each other every morning, and I listened and thought about how I had spent 14 years choosing something else every morning, and how that had not been the wrong choice even when it was the hard one. During the reception, I sat at my assigned table placed near the back, I noticed, where the seating chart would not advertise my presence to Sophie's family. My mother was at the head table with David and Sophie's parents. My father sat beside her, the same careful posture he always had at events he didn't quite know how to inhabit. I ordered sparkling water and talked to the woman beside me, who turned out to be Sophie's aunt from Calgary. a physiotherapist named Karen who had done 3 months of volunteer work with injured veterans through a civilian partnership program. She shook my hand and said, "What you people do, I just don't think most of us understand it." "Most of us don't need to," I said. "That's sort of the point." She laughed. I liked her immediately. It was during the appetizers that my mother appeared beside my chair. She was wearing a pale pink suit that I remembered from a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. She looked the same as she always did, composed, put together, the expression she wore in public that gave nothing away. "Rachel." She pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down without being invited. "You wore it." "I did." "David is upset." "Is he?" "People are staring." "They were staring an hour ago and they've since gone back to their smoked salmon," I said. "It seems fine." My mother folded her hands on the table. She was quiet for a moment. I had grown up reading her silences, and I knew this one. It was the silence before a version of an argument she had already decided to lose. "I just don't understand," she said finally. "Why you always have to make things about yourself." I looked at her. I looked at this woman who had driven me to piano lessons for 6 years, and made my lunches through high school, and sat in those bleachers at RMC, and cried when she hadn't expected to. I looked at her, and felt the old familiar compression in my chest, not anger, not quite hurt. Something more like tiredness. "I'm not making it about myself," I said. "I'm here for David. I drove 4 hours for David. The uniform is just what I've spent 14 years becoming." She looked away. "The Hendersons think you're trying to show them up." "I don't know the Hendersons." "Sophie's parent." "Then I have no idea what they think, and I'm not sure it's my concern." My mother stood up. She looked down at me with the expression she used when she had made a decision about something, and was waiting for the world to agree with it. "I just hope," she said, "that you can put the family first sometimes, just once." She walked back to the head table. I turned to Karen, who was studying her bread roll with great diplomatic concentration. "Sorry about that," I said. "Don't be," she said. "My mother used to do the same thing at every family event until I was 34. She paused. "I'm 47 now. We're fine." It was David who found me, an hour later, near the bar on the far side of the room. He looked like himself, taller than I remembered, which is a thing I always thought when I saw him after a long absence. Dark suit, the same dark eyes we had both gotten from my father. He had Sophie's lipstick on his cheek and he didn't know it. "You could have just worn the dress," he said. "Not hello. Not it's good to see you." "You could have told me yourself," I said, "instead of going through Mom." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I didn't want to make a thing of it, and yet. He ordered a beer. I waited. David always needed a moment before he could say what he actually meant. It was one of the things I knew about him. One of the things that was still true even after all the years and all the distance. "Sophie's dad asked who you were," he said. "What did you tell him?" "I said you were my sister." He asked what the uniform was about. David took a drink of his beer. "I told him you were in the Army." "The Canadian Armed Forces," I said. "It's different from the Army." He wanted to know what rank. "What did you say?" David looked at me sideways. I didn't know what to say. I said I thought you were a major. I said nothing. "Are you a major?" "No." A pause. "What are you?" "Brigadier General." David stared at me. Something shifted in his face, something I couldn't quite read. That's high. It's 1 star. There are 3 above me. But you're a general?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. He turned his beer glass in his hands. Behind us, the string quartet had transitioned to something more celebratory, and people were starting to drift toward the dance floor, and Sophie was laughing at something her bridesmaid had said, head thrown back, entirely happy. "I didn't know," David said. "I know you didn't. Mom said you were a major. 2-3 years ago. I didn't know you'd been promoted." I sent a card. I might not have read it. I let that sit. "Rachel." He said my name like he was trying to find something attached to it. What do you actually do? What does a brigadier general do?" And here was the question I had never been asked. Not properly. Not by anyone in my family. Not once in 14 years. What do you actually do? So I told him. I told him about Latvia, about the forward operating area near Agi, about the logistics of keeping a multinational battalion supplied through a Baltic winter. I told him about Mali, about the intelligence work and the medical evacuations, and the day a convoy I was responsible for hit a dust storm 60 kilometers from Gao, and we navigated by radio and dead reckoning for 4 hours. I told him about Brussels, about the late nights in NATO headquarters and the strange suspended feeling of living inside bureaucracy that determined where soldiers lived and died. I told him about the girl from Winnipeg, a corporal named Melissa, who had come to my tent during a night exercise in Mali so shaken she couldn't speak clearly, and how I'd sat with her for 2 hours until she could, and how she was now a sergeant. I did not cry. I have not cried in front of family in a long time. David did. Not much, just the kind of brief involuntary thing that happens to men who have been taught their whole lives not to, when they are suddenly ambushed by something they weren't ready for. He turned his head and pressed his fist against his mouth and looked at the middle distance for a moment. I didn't know any of that, he said. You never asked. I know, he set down his beer. I know. I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm genuinely sorry. I believed him. That's the thing about David, whatever his failures of attention, whatever the years of easy dismissal, when he was sorry, he meant it. Can I ask you something, he said. You can. The men who stood up when you came in. The veterans. Yes. Did you know they would do that? No. But they knew. They recognized the uniform, the rank insignia. It's a form of courtesy. It means something. To people who've served. David nodded slowly. He looked across the room to where Sophie's father was standing with a small group of men, laughing at something. A successful man, clearly, the easy confidence of someone who had never had to prove himself in a context that was not of his choosing. He asked me, David said, whether he should be worried. When you came in, whether something was wrong, whether you were there officially. What did you say? I said you were my sister. He paused. I said I was lucky you came. I looked at him. I mean it, he said. I should have called you. I should have been paying better attention for about 14 years. Yes, I said. You should have. He almost smiled. You're not going to make this easy on me. No. Good. He picked up his beer again. Good. You shouldn't. My father found me during the dessert course. He sat down across from me without preamble, the way he always did, and he looked at me for a long moment with that expression I had never quite learned to decode, the one that might have been pride and might have been grief and might have been both at once. David told me, he said. What did he tell you? Brigadier General. He said it carefully, like a word in a language he was learning. Your grandfather was a corporal, Korea. He looked down at the tablecloth. He never talked about it either. I hadn't known that. In 34 years, no one had told me that. Why not? I asked. My father shook his head slowly. I don't know. He came home and he worked, and he died when I was 12, and I don't think I ever asked him what he'd done over there. He looked up. I think maybe I was afraid of the answer. We sat with that for a moment. I'm not going to pretend I understood your choices, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I wanted you nearby. I wanted you safe. I wanted to know where you were. I know. But... He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and brought out something small, a Legion poppy, the kind sold every November outside grocery stores and hockey rinks across the country. He set it on the table between us. I bought this in November. I was going to send it to you, but I didn't have your address in Brussels. I carried it around for a year. He pushed it across the table toward me. I'm proud of you. I should have said it a long time ago. I'm proud of you. 3 words that had taken 34 years to travel the length of a tablecloth. I picked up the poppy. It was bent a little, worn from being in his pocket for a year. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me for something I should have been saying since you graduated. He stood up, straightened his jacket. Now, are you going to dance at your brother's wedding? Or are you going to sit back here all night looking important? I don't dance in uniform. You're not in the field, he said. I think they'll let it go. I danced. Not much, and not particularly well, which has always been true of me regardless of what I'm wearing. Sophie pulled me onto the floor during a song I half recognized, and she put both her arms around me and said, close to my ear, I'm really glad you wore it. I want you to know that. I told David it was fine. I told him weeks ago. He didn't mention that. Men, she said, pulling back and rolling her eyes in that serene way she had, like she had already arrived at peace with this. He was nervous. He worries about what my parents think. What do they think now? She smiled. My father looked you up during dinner. He spent 20 minutes on his phone reading about Operation Reassurance. She glanced over her shoulder to where her father was now standing with the retired wing commander I'd recognized earlier. The two of them deep in conversation. He's a different person than he was 3 hours ago. I thought about that. About how it doesn't take much. About how the door to understanding is usually unlocked, it just needs someone willing to push. The drive back to Ottawa was long and dark, the highway empty through the night, the trees just shadows against the sky. I thought about my grandfather, the corporal from Korea, whose name I had never thought to look up, and whose silence had trained my father into the same silence, and whose silence had shaped the shape of the family I'd grown up in. Long chains. The things we don't say, handed down like heirlooms. My phone rang somewhere past Kingston, my mother. I answered on the car's system. Rachel. Her voice was quieter than usual. Are you still driving? Another hour. A pause. I'm calling because I want to say that I was wrong. About what I said to you tonight. About the family. I waited. You've never put yourself before this family, she said, and her voice caught a little, the way it had at my graduation ceremony when she hadn't expected to cry. I think we've put ourselves before you, and I'm sorry. Outside the window, the dark fields scrolled past under a wide, cold sky. Somewhere behind me was a hall full of people who had watched 25 veterans stand up to acknowledge a woman they didn't know, because they recognized what 14 years of service looked like, and they thought it deserved to be seen. Thank you, Mom, I said. I want you to come for Christmas, she said. Properly. In the uniform if you want. In whatever you want. I'll come, I said. Good. She cleared her throat. Drive safe. I always do. It's been 8 months since David's wedding. My father calls me on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, maybe 2 out of 4, but it's a thing that exists now, a small, regular shape in the week. He's been reading about the history of Canadian peacekeeping operations. He sent me an article last month about Cyprus that included a note that said, "Did you know about this?" I didn't know about any of this. David and Sophie sent me a photograph from their honeymoon hiking in Jasper, the Rockies enormous behind them, both of them laughing. He's applied to volunteer with a veterans housing initiative out of Hamilton, helping with renovation work for former CF members who need accessibility modifications. He told me about it on the phone with the careful enthusiasm of someone who has found the beginning of something. I told him I thought it was a good idea. I told him I was proud of him. My grandfather's name was Harold. I found him in the Veterans Registry, Harold William Delaney, from Barrie, Ontario, corporal. He served in the 3rd Battalion, Royal Canadian Regiment. He came home in 1953 and opened a hardware store, and never said much about what happened over there. I found a photograph of him in his uniform. He's 22 in the picture, standing very straight, and something about the way he holds himself, the particular stillness of it, looked familiar to me. 14 years is not a long time. In a family it can feel like a whole generation, but I've learned, and I am still learning, that the silences we inherit are not the silences we have to keep. That it is possible, even after a long time, to sit down across a tablecloth from someone you love and say the thing that needed to be said. And sometimes the quietest kind of courage is just walking through the door.